In Plato's allegory of the cave, we're asked to imagine people locked in a cave who can only see the shadows cast upon the cave walls by events. The viewers cannot see the events themselves, just their shadows. They can try to infer what is really happening based on these shadows, but all they are left with is indirect inferences about what might be happening in the world that could cast the shadows that they see. This is, of course, a metaphor for our difficulty in discerning what is real based solely on the indirect shadows that we have from our senses. For example, the retina detects two-dimensional patterns of light that have been cast upon the wall of the retina. These images are not the objects in the world, and in fact, any image or sequence of images could have been cast by many possible events in the world. So how do we go from an ambiguous sequence of 2D patterns cast upon the retina to a conscious experience of a 3D world? Following in Plato's footsteps 2,000 years later, the philosopher Immanuel Kant argued that all we have access to is our subjective experience of events in the world, while lacking any way to experience events as they are in themselves, independent of our perception of them. Our conscious experience is the only thing that we know for sure, and yet our conscious experience is a construction that can make mistakes. We know this because visual illusions, hallucinations, visions, fantasies, and dreams may have nothing to do with what is really happening out there in the world. If all we have access to is our constructed and potentially faulty conscious experience, how can we possibly ever know what is real outside of our perception of it? Perhaps we cannot know the world in itself, but we can infer what must be happening in the world based on the evidence that we have from perception and those scientific devices that extend our senses into domains that we can normally not perceive, such as into the invisible domain of the very small using a microscope, or into the invisible domain of the very distant using a telescope. What we call light is an incredibly tiny portion of a vast electromagnetic spectrum. We've evolved sensors that are sensitive to the domain of electromagnetic energy emitted by our sun. That makes sense. It makes sense to become sensitive to information where the information lies. However, in a sense, we're all blind. We are blind to the vast majority of energy around us. We cannot see those parts of the electromagnetic spectrum that we call radio waves, or cosmic rays, or X-rays, or cell phone signals. For us, it's as if they did not exist, but we know they must exist because our TVs, radios, and cell phones work. But what if everyone else but us could see magnetic field lines? Then this might bother us because then we would feel blind, relatively speaking. The only reason it does not bother us too much that we are blind to the vast majority of energy, events, and structure around us is that everyone else is also blind.